Welcome to my 2024 road trip recap. Jumped on a plane on a Saturday morning from BWI, heading nonstop to Albuquerque. Stocked up on some Dutch Brothers for the road. First stop, Petrified National Monument. Headed west, stopped at Phillips 66 gas station on Route 66 at the Continental Divide. It was snowy. Started at the south entrance of Petrified Forest National Park. I stopped at the Visitor Center in the museum and then hiked the Crystal Forest Trail. Stopped at Jasper Overlook and lots of other sights along the way. Really enjoyed taking in the views and hiking the Blue Mesa Trail into the canyon. Had to stop at the Route 66 marker in the park. Arrived at Painted Desert Inn Museum at the north entrance. Took some time to take in the Painted Desert along the Desert Rim Trail. It was just stunning. Snapped a picture on the way out of the north entrance. Stopped at Hubble Trading Post National Historic Site, where my car started to also give me some trouble. Stay tuned. Arrived late to Monument Valley, but what a view. Got up early the next day so I wouldn't miss the iconic sunrise over the valley. After running around the hotel a bit, I finally realized that I had the perfect view from my room balcony. Checked out of the View Hotel just before 9 a.m. and headed straight to the start of the 17-mile loop road through Monument Valley. Some of the clouds were lingering around the tops of the monuments, but it was sunny and gorgeous, and eventually the clouds lifted away. The road was very, very rough though. I got out so many times along the way of the trip. Had to take a photo of the rental car with this backdrop. The car trouble began. Even so, I continued very slowly and carefully on the drive through the valley, knowing I'd be calling the car rental company once I finished the loop. It was an amazing drive, tons of potholes, and really had to manage that, but it took me about 2 hours and I really enjoyed that experience. Drove 30 minutes to the closest town to call about the car trouble. Thankfully, my next destination had an airport where I was able to exchange cars. I was in Page, Arizona, and I headed to the Glen Canyon Dam Bridge overlook for a view of the Colorado River. Later that evening, with a million other people, I headed to Horseshoe Bend for sunset. Made a last-minute decision to take a 1-hour guided tour of Lower Antelope Canyon in Page. Totally worth it, but only because our guide was awesome and I lingered at the end of the group. This made it easier for me to talk with the guide and take photos of the canyon without people in the shots. Visited the Dam Visitor Center before heading out of town. Arrived at Bryce Canyon National Park a little after 4 p.m. and then headed to Inspiration Point for my very first views of the canyon. Checked out the lodge before calling it a day. And got a picture on the way out. "9 a.m. and back at Inspiration Point for breakfast. Even had a little friend join me. Headed to Sunset Point as the base for the day before I began my hike into the canyon. It was around 32 degrees when I first got to the park. I walked a little along the rim trail before I hit the Navajo Loop and Queen's Garden Trail, about 3.5 miles. For me, it was a moderate hike, so beautiful and diverse. It got up to about 55 degrees. Not too many people hiking along with me, but it was a really gorgeous day and just soaked it all in. I started around 9:30 and I ended at 11:30 a.m. After some lunch, I hopped in the car and I drove to the furthest point on the park road, Rainbow Point. On the way back, I stopped at lots of overlooks just to see all the different scenery and the different ways to take in the canyon. After spending pretty much all day inside the main portion of Bryce Canyon, I headed over to the Mossy Cave Trail just on the outside of the main park area. Along the stream, the pink rock was really beautiful. It was a nice trail where I could end the day, kind of shadowy and cooler. It was a really nice little creek moving along. Usually there's a waterfall, but it wasn't flowing. I did get to the cave and it definitely was mossy. On my way out of the hike, a teeny tiny little snake jumped out onto the trail near me. Seemed like the perfect day to take the scenic Route 143 Patchwork Parkway to Zion. There was a little traffic. Detoured over to the Cedar Breaks National Monument. The visitor center was closed for the season, but I still stopped at the overlooks. There was still snow on the ground and the temperatures were hovering around the 40s. It was very windy too. Just gorgeous though. Drove through the ski town called Bryan Head, where they were outside in the 50-degree weather putting up Christmas decor. And then I eventually arrived at Kolob Canyons of Zion National Park. headed straight for the Timber Creek Overlook Trail. This is such a small part of Zion on the west side. So lovely, not a lot of people. There were 2 staff in the visitor center who were so helpful and great to chat with for a while. Got onto the short 1.1 mile in and out trail. The temperatures were in the low 60s, sunny and blue skies. Beautiful, breathtaking views. Headed to the main park entrance and the visitor center. It was 4:30 p.m., so I decided to meander along the Virgin River and the Parus Trail. You're surrounded by the mountains, so I stopped so many times along the river, but also just looking up at the tops of the mountains. There were blue skies and it was about 73 degrees. This is a well-traveled trail for both hikers, walkers, and people on bikes. Even got to see some deer so close to the trail as I was heading out. I just leisurely walked along for about 2 hours. Left around 6:30 p.m. and I just saw the most amazing skies as I was driving to Hurricane. Started the day at Muddy Bee's Bakery for a blueberry and peach kolob bar. Headed an hour away to Coral Pink Sand Dunes State Park. It was sunny and in the mid-60s. I just walked around in the sand and up one of the highest dunes to get a great view of the park. There were lots of people on bikes and ATVs, people sledding down the dunes. I had a great time just people watching here. The sand was so fine and just really unique to touch. I stayed about an hour just playing in the sand until I headed back for my next destination. The elusive Red Hollow Canyon. This was a very hard to find spot nestled in a residential area. It took about 20 minutes to walk along a dry riverbed to get to the entrance of the Slot Canyon. I was only able to go in a little bit of the canyon, but I did have some fun climbing around as best I could. Left around 1:30 p.m. and headed for the east entrance to Zion National Park, taking the beautifully scenic route into the park, including through the 1-mile tunnel. That's a window in the tunnel. Once inside at the main visitor center, I hopped on a park shuttle where I saw Angel's Landing, and I got to the end so I could see the beginning of the Narrows. And got another picture on my way out of the park. Tomato basil soup and grilled cheese from Main Street Cafe. Started the day with some coffee from Scooters. Had a few other stops in mind that just didn't work out, so I headed to Parowan Gap Petroglyphs. This is a very remote spot that used to be a riverbed flow. So interesting to see the petroglyphs all over the rocks. After that, it was back on the road for a very long stretch toward my next destination. I was in the Great Basin, and there were stretches of long, straight roads with free-roaming cattle surrounded by mountains. Stopped at a farmer's market for sourdough bread and peach jam. And then I made it to Great Basin National Park in Baker, Nevada. I stopped at the visitor center and then headed into the park for a little bit of exploring. I knew ahead of time that weather would play a factor and that a point of the road into the peak of the park would be closed. Instead, I drove around and I found a couple of trails not too far from the trailhead and meandered around for a bit. There were bright spots of the yellow cottonwood trees. And on my way out of the park, caught some wild turkeys. Back to the Stargazer for the night and hung out at the Bristlecone General Store with others to watch the World Series. Back at Great Basin National Park and on to the Lehman Caves tour. Fantastic 1-hour walk through the caves. Not every part, but most of it. Got to explore, had a great tour guide in Maureen who showed us around. There were about 15 people in our group. Afterwards, drove up as far as I could on Wheeler Drive to where it was closed and had some last looks of the park. Then I headed back on the road. Saw a prescribed burn on my way to Teasdale, Utah. Got to my Airbnb with some groceries and whipped up some sauteed veggies before hitting the hay. Started my day at the Gifford Homestead in Capitol Reef National Park. Made my way inside and chose my first pie, peach. Then I just wandered around the homestead for a while and walked through the orchards and the fields. Found a quiet spot and dug in to eat about half of my peach pie. Unfortunately, the scenic drive into the canyon was closed, so I headed out another way to one of the park signs. Drove around a little bit more, got a little snack to eat, changed my clothes, and I decided to head out on the Hickman Bridge Trail. It was a beautiful sunny day, and the temps were in the low 70s. It was a pretty steep trail going up, but then it leveled out a bit, and it was a great, fun hike to the natural bridge. Back on the road after that to see more orchards and also the schoolhouse. Stopped at Panorama Point and just soaked in all the views at the end of the afternoon. Met David and Catherine from Virginia and took their Polaroid picture for them. Drove a little bit further to get to Gooseneck Point and Sunset Point trails, where I was able just to walk around and check out the late afternoon shadows in the canyons and on the mountains. Just couldn't get enough of all of God's amazing creation in this place. But I eventually went back and settled in for the night with a bowl of veggies. Woke up to wind and blowing snow and 39 degrees. Stayed inside for a bit until the weather got better. Left at 12:45 p.m. It was sunny and 41 degrees, but still windy. Drove over to Dark Sky Coffee in Torrey. Even though the temperatures were a bit chilly, it was a beautiful day for a drive through the park. I stopped at a visitor center in Torrey, spoke with a gentleman there, and decided to travel Route 12 south, said to be one of the most beautiful highways in Utah. And it did not disappoint. I stopped at so many different overlooks along the route. Each of these overlooks had such different views. You could see for miles and miles, canyons and mountains and shadows. I drove all the way to Escalante. I got to the visitor center as they closed at 4 p.m. Then I turned around and got back on the road and headed north back to Teasdale. Took in one last sunset over Capitol Reef National Park and called it a night. Packed up and left around 8:45 a.m. It was 28 degrees and you could see some fresh snow on the higher elevations. Drove from Teasdale heading east, went through Capitol Reef one last time, and then headed north. Stopped in the shadow of Kathleen Rock to get a view of some of the monuments in the distance, including Molly's Castle. And then I finally arrived at my next destination, Goblin Valley State Park. Arrived around 11 a.m. It was about 40 degrees out and there were not a lot of people there. This was such a fun playground to explore. I stayed about 2 hours just walking around, climbing, taking in all the sights. It was so amazingly fun and different. One of my favorite things about being in this park was trying to figure out what some of these rocks looked like. To me, some of them look like animals, faces, shapes, characters. I had such a grand time looking at them from different angles. Brought a big smile to my face. And then it was back on the road toward Green River. Grabbed an amazingly delicious horchata and a vampira at a food truck, and then I found the world's largest watermelon slice in Green River. It's also a float, and you can drive it. And then I made it to Canyonlands National Park. Got to the visitor center right before it closed at 4 p.m. Walked across the street and got my first look into the canyon. I was in the Island in the Sky district. Since it was a late afternoon, I decided to try my luck at the Mesa Arch Trail. Sunrise is more popular here, but there was still a good amount of folks hanging around. Thankfully, people were very respectful and gladly took pictures of each other sitting in front of the arch. After that, I drove over to the Candlestick Tower overlook. It wasn't quite sunset yet, but it was a gorgeous view of the canyons from this location. It was around 5:10 p.m. Stopped at Doughbird in Moab for a cronut and coffee that I took into the park. It was a chilly morning in the mid-30s. Started the day at the Schaefer Canyon overlook. Stopped at Candlestick Tower overlook again since I had been there the night before, but this time I was there in the morning to see a different way the light shone in the canyon. Drove to the Grand View Point overlook to hike the trail. I got there around 10:30 a.m. It was about a 2-mile out and back trail with so many amazing views again of the canyon. And in the background, you could see the La Salle Mountains covered in snow. Hiked up to the first overlook at Upheaval Dome, a really interesting spot and background story. Really enjoyed being able to stop at the different overlooks. So many different ways that the light would cast shadows into the canyon. After leaving the park, I did stop at the La Salle Mountain Viewpoint. Sunset at my Airbnb was unreal. Warmed up with some takeout Thai for dinner. Another Doughbird donut and off to Arches National Park. First stop before a tour bus emptied out, Balanced Rock. Next up, hiking the Windows Loop. And then it was time to tackle the slow uphill trail to Delicate Arch. I headed out at 10:50 a.m. and arrived at the arch at 11:45 a.m. I found a spot to settle in, enjoy the view, eat some snacks, and hang out for about 45 minutes. Considering that this is one of the most popular stops in the park, it really wasn't as crowded as I anticipated it would be. You could still see the snow-capped La Salle Mountains in the background too. Next up was Sand Arch, hidden among some boulders. The light beams and the shadows and the sand floor made this a really fun place to explore. At this point, it was about 2 o'clock and hovering around 55 degrees. After that, I took the short hike over to Broken Arch. Next up was Devil's Garden section, another very popular part of the park. I just took a short hike over to see the tunnel arch. Headed back to the window section so I could hike over to Double Arch. It was about 4 p.m. I could tell that there were some folks there who were positioning themselves to get ready for the sunset. This was another great place just to climb and explore all the different nooks and crannies. My last stop before heading out for the day was at the Garden of Eden. On one of the formations, there was a group of climbers. I wrapped up my time around 5 p.m., and thankfully the visitor center was open till 6, so I was able to swing by, get some souvenirs, get my passport book stamped, and then call it a day. Woke up to another stunning sunrise in Moab. Temps were around 39 degrees when I left, right around 9 a.m. Thanks to the recommendation from my Airbnb host, my first stop was at Edge of the Cedars Museum. I was the only visitor there for a while, and I got to wander around and take in all the artifacts and learn the history of this part of the country. One of their most prized and oldest artifacts is a macaw feather sash. The museum is intentionally situated next to a Puebloan village. And one of the highlights is the kiva, which you can actually climb down into and look around. There's a pathway that takes you around the village and tells you a little bit about its history. This was an exceptional museum experience. Next up on the route for the day was a stop at Natural Bridges National Monument. This is in a very remote area, but definitely worth the stop if you can. I took my time and drove the 9-mile loop to see 3 natural bridges. It was another sunny day in the mid-50s. Because of the background, you really had to look closely to find the bridges. The last bridge on the loop is the Owachoma. I decided to hike a little bit down the trail to get a closer look. Made it to Cortez, Colorado, and got a snack at Wild Edge Brewery. Buckle up for a bumpy ride. Grabbed some Ziggy's coffee and then headed to Mesa Verde National Park. Stopped at the visitor center first to get my bearings and find out the weather and the conditions for the day. It was partly cloudy and in the low 40s. I already knew in advance that because of construction, that the Cliff Palace Loop and the Wetherill areas were closed. Headed up the hill into the park. My first glimpse of the cliff dwellings was at the Spruce Tree Overlook. Drove the Mesa Top Loop to see lots of pit houses and pueblos. I took my time and stopped at every single overlook and every Pueblan site. Even though Cliff Palace was closed, there were still some amazing overlooks to look into this village. Before leaving this part of the park, I stopped at the Mesa Verde Museum and watched the park film in the old theater, which really was a beautiful spot. On my way out, I drove through a few burn areas from wildfires. Even encountered some curious ravens. There were still so many sights to see before heading down the mountain. I'm at the far view sites. You can't really pick it up, but it is starting to snow a little bit. Very briefly, very small. It's like 41 degrees, and it's snowing. And as I finally descended out of the park, the weather took a very dark turn. I took my time and drove very slowly and very safely down the mountain. Back to the sign for one last picture in the snow. It was only about 2:30, but I was concerned about the weather and what might be happening the next couple days. I stopped at the Welcome Center in Cortez and spoke to two beautiful ladies who highly suggested, based on the weather forecast, that I reroute my travel plans. After looking at the weather and the road condition maps with them, I agreed, so I spent the remainder of the afternoon and the evening changing all of my plans so I would head south instead. My new route was going to be taking me due south toward Gallup, New Mexico. But before heading out, had to stop at the Silver Bean, an Airstream converted into a drive-through coffee shop. Got a mocha and headed on my way. Since I was now in the area, I decided to take a detour over to Four Corners. Unlike the weather from the previous day, it was sunny skies in the mid-50s, but very windy. I was one of just a handful of folks at Four Corners. Enjoyed some fry bread in all 4 states. Back on the road and heading due south, I passed by and through the iconic Shiprock, New Mexico. And why not? Drove through a little bit of a dust storm. Around 5 o'clock, I made it to my cabin for the night near the town of Rama. Another gorgeous sunset before having some soup and settling in for the night. Headed out at 9:45 a.m. There was frost all over my car, but it was sunny, yet 35 degrees. Just around the corner was El Malpais National Monument. As I drove through this part of the park, you could see the lava fields. Stopped at the El Calderon area to view one of the caves, Junction Cave. The National Monument is pretty scattered, so you have to drive a bit. I headed out up toward Grants, New Mexico, and I could see Mount Taylor in the distance. Since Route 66 goes through Grants, I had to stop by and get a picture. The Monument's Visitor Center is located right near Grants, so I stopped there, spoke with the ranger, and then decided to head to Sandstone Bluffs. These bluffs had fantastic overviews where you could truly see the lava fields. Headed next to the trailhead for the Acoma Zuni Trail. The ranger said that I could walk about 15 minutes and then I would actually be able to walk on some of the lava. So that's what I did. I'm climbing on lava that's really old. Very cool. This trail over the lava fields has been around for generations. It was used by the indigenous people as a trade route. I didn't hike too much on the lava field because I didn't have any trekking poles with me, and it was very uneven. I left the monument around 1:15 and headed east toward Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And as the day went along, I was paying attention to the weather forecast, and something very unexpected was about to happen. Although I thought that I was evading the weather up in Colorado by turning south, apparently I was also driving right into another winter storm. Woke up at 8:15 to see what was going on with the weather. Now it appeared the storm would have impact through Friday, which was my scheduled day to leave. Looking at the forecast, I decided to change my plans again. Got everything situated for a Saturday departure instead of Friday, and then I headed out to stock up on some food supplies. The snow has begun. It's 3 o'clock on Wednesday, November 6th. am so glad that this Airbnb has a carport for my car. It is now 4:45 and you can see the snow on the mountains over there. And I basically just chilled out for the rest of the day. At 9 p.m., we had about 2 inches of snow. Woke up at 8 a.m. with about 4 inches of snow on the ground. Continued to keep an eye on the weather forecast, and it looked like where I was could get up to 2 feet of snow. But I love snow, so I made the most of it. Even made a mini snow woman. And enjoyed my Dutch brothers. Binged some TV, ate some good food, and enjoyed the evening. By Friday morning, the outlook looked promising. Since this was now my last full day, I decided to head out to Los Alamos. Even though it looked like they got significantly more snow than where I was, I figured I'd drive out and see what the road conditions were like. If I felt uncomfortable, I'd turn around. But the roads were in great condition, so I kept on going. And I'm glad I did. Even though it was cloudy and overcast as I was driving up the mountain, as soon as I got into Los Alamos, the skies opened and it was blue skies and bright snow and just magnificent. There was definitely much more snow up here than where I had been. I parked by Ashley Pond right next to the Manhattan Project Historical Site Visitor Center. Although the sidewalks were a bit sketchy, I decided to try the walking tour through the town. I was able to see a couple of the buildings that were part of the Manhattan Project town. And I was able to make it over to the Oppenheimer house. They are in the process of renovating the house into a museum. That was as far as I was able to go because of the condition of the sidewalks, so I turned around. Walked back to Ashley Pond and had a sandwich in the car. And I walked around the pond a bit. Because of the weather, some of the sites in town were closed, but thankfully the Los Alamos History Museum was open. The lodge is a big part of this historical site. And as part of the admission to the museum, you're able to walk around and see how the lodge is set up today. On my way out of town, I passed by the tower and a replication of the main gate. And after a lovely visit, I headed back down the hill toward Espanola. Now the skies were blue again and the snow-covered mountains glistened. Even though the last week of my trip threw me some curveballs, I wouldn't have wanted it to end any other way. Left my Airbnb in Espanola at 8 a.m. and headed toward the airport in Albuquerque. The closer I drove to Albuquerque, though, the less snow I saw. Got settled at the airport and had a snack before boarding my flight. As we took flight, it was really fun to look out the window and see the different levels of snow on the ground and how it changed in the landscape. Had a lovely flight back to the East Coast and landed safely in Baltimore around 5 p.m. This is what ended up as my final trip route. And here's a bunch of stats from my adventures.